The dust-laden winds of Raton, New Mexico Territory, carried whispers of broken promises and new beginnings as Nora Zimmerman watched the last stagecoach of the day rumble away without slowing. She had been standing beside her weathered trunk for hours, her navy blue traveling dress now coated with a thin layer of frontier grit, her hopes fading with the September sun of 1878. The station master had long since locked up and gone home, leaving her alone at the edge of a town that had yet to decide if it would welcome or reject her. Nora tucked a wayward strand of auburn hair behind her ear and fought back tears of frustration. At 22, she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Philadelphia to take a teaching position that apparently no longer existed. The letter in her reticule, now crumpled from countless readings, had promised accommodations and employment. The reality was an empty platform and growing darkness. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her straighten her spine and brush futilely at the wrinkles in her skirt. A wagon appeared, drawn by 2 chestnut horses and driven by a broad-shouldered man whose face was shadowed by a well-worn hat. He pulled the team to a halt near the platform and studied her with curious blue eyes. "Been waiting long, miss." His voice carried the rough edges of the frontier, but held a gentleness that surprised her. "Since noon," Nora admitted, maintaining the proper distance between them that her Eastern upbringing demanded. "I was expected, but it seems there's been some confusion." The man nodded slowly, taking in her trunk and the exhaustion evident in her posture. "Name's Raid Walker. I ranch outside of town." He removed his hat briefly, revealing sun-bleached blonde hair. "Can't say I know about any expected arrivals, but I do know you can't stay out here all night. I'm Nora Zimmerman." She hesitated, weighing propriety against practicality. "I was to be the new schoolteacher, but when I arrived, I was informed the position had been filled 3 weeks ago." Reed's expression darkened. That'd be Mayor Holcomb's doing. Man changes his mind with the wind. He looked toward the town, then back at Nora. "Come rest your feet in my wagon. I'll take you to the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson's a good woman. She'll have a room." Nora hesitated, measuring the risk against her dwindling options. In Philadelphia, accepting a ride from a stranger would be unthinkable. Here, with night falling and no alternatives, the decision was clear. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would appreciate that greatly." Reed jumped down from the wagon and lifted her trunk with surprising ease. "Heavy reading material, madam." "Books are my most valued possessions," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. "A teacher without books is like a cowboy without a horse." He chuckled at that, securing her trunk in the wagon bed. "Fair point." He offered his hand to help her climb onto the wooden seat, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Though I'd argue a good horse is easier to come by than education out here." As they pulled away from the station, Nora felt the weight of the day's disappointments begin to lift. She had come west seeking purpose and independence. The path ahead had changed, but perhaps not for the worse. Reed kept a respectful distance as they drove, but she found herself studying his profile against the darkening sky. There was a steadiness to him that offered comfort amid the chaos of her situation. "Have you lived in Raton long, Mr. Walker?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "5 years now. Came out from Texas after the war with nothing but determination and a handful of cattle." He guided the horses around a rut in the road. "Now I've got a decent spread about 10 miles north, not rich by any means, but the land's paid for." "That's impressive," Nora said sincerely. "Building something from nothing takes courage." Reed glanced at her with a hint of surprise. "Most Eastern folks I've met think ranching's a step down from civilized work." "I find honest work of any kind admirable," she replied. My father was a carpenter before he died. He taught me that it's not what you do that matters, but how well you do it. The main street of Raton came into view, a collection of wooden buildings illuminated by oil lamps and the occasional glow from windows. Unlike the bustling streets of Philadelphia, the town seemed to breathe more slowly, the evening bringing a peaceful quiet rather than increased activity. Mrs. Wilson's is just down the street, Reed said, pointing to a two-story building with a small porch. Best apple pie in the territory, too, if you're hungry. Nora's stomach rumbled at the mention of food, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. I believe I could be persuaded to try it. Reed pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. Before he could climb down, the door opened and a plump woman with silver-streaked hair stepped onto the porch. Reed Walker. "This is a surprise," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gaze shifted to Nora, curiosity evident in her expression. "Evening, Mrs. Wilson. This is Miss Zimmerman. She arrived today expecting to start as the town's teacher, but it seems the position's been filled." Mrs. Wilson's face softened with understanding. "Oh, you poor dear. That's Holcomb's doing, no doubt. Come in, come in. I've got a room available and supper still warm on the stove." Reed helped Nora down from the wagon, then retrieved her trunk. As they climbed the steps to the porch, Nora turned to him. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Walker. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "Just being neighborly," he replied, though the warmth in his eyes suggested something more. "Besides, Raton needs good people. Maybe teaching didn't work out, but I'm sure you'll find your place here." Mrs. Wilson ushered them inside to a cozy sitting room that smelled of baked goods and coffee. "Put the trunk by the stairs, Reed. You'll stay for supper, if it's no trouble," he said, setting down the trunk where indicated. "Nonsense. There's always room at my table for you." Mrs. Wilson turned to Nora. "Now, let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before we eat." As Nora followed her hostess up the narrow staircase, she glanced back to find Reed watching her, his expression thoughtful. Something fluttered in her chest, a feeling of possibility that hadn't been there when she'd stood alone at the station. The room Mrs. Wilson showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's not fancy, but it's comfortable," the older woman said. "It's perfect," Nora replied honestly. After the uncertainty of the day, walls and a roof felt like luxury. "Wash up and come down when you're ready," Mrs. Wilson patted her arm. "And don't you worry about tomorrow just yet. Things have a way of working out in their own time." Left alone, Nora poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the travel dust from her face and hands. She unpinned her hair, brushed it quickly, and secured it again in a simpler style. There was little she could do about her wrinkled dress, but she straightened it as best she could. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she took a deep breath. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, echoing her father's favorite advice. Then she squared her shoulders and went downstairs. The dining room held a large oak table where Reed and an elderly man Nora hadn't met were already seated. Mrs. Wilson bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a steaming pot of stew. "Miss Zimmerman, this is Mr. Hollister," she said, nodding toward the older gentleman. "He's been with us for going on 3 years now." Mr. Hollister nodded politely. "Welcome to Raton, young lady." Reed stood as Nora entered, waiting until she was seated before taking his place again. It was a small courtesy that reminded her of home, unexpected in this frontier setting. The meal was simple but delicious beef stew, fresh bread, and the promised apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily with Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Hollister sharing stories about the town and its inhabitants that had Nora alternating between laughter and astonishment. "So what will you do now, Miss Zimmerman?" Mr. Hollister asked as they finished their pie. "Heading back east," Nora shook her head firmly. "No. I came west for a reason. The teaching position may be gone, but I still have my skills and determination." She smiled slightly. "And a trunk full of books." "The mercantile might be hiring," Mrs. Wilson suggested. "Old Thompson's eyes aren't what they used to be. He needs someone who can keep proper accounts." "Or the newspaper," Mr. Hollister added. "Young Jenkins is always complaining about needing someone who can actually spell." Reed had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "The families out my way have been talking about starting a school. Nothing official yet, just discussions. 10 or 12 children with no education to speak of." Nora's interest was immediately piqued. "A rural school," Reed nodded. "Most ranching families can't spare their children for the trip into town every day. Too much work to be done and the distances are too great. But a school closer to the homesteads." "It would need a building," Nora said, her mind already working through the possibilities. "And supplies." "The old McClintock place has been empty since they moved to California," Reed said. "It's small but solid. As for supplies," he shrugged, "we'd figure something out." Mrs. Wilson watched this exchange with knowing eyes. "Sounds like you two have the beginnings of a plan," she said, gathering empty plates. "But that's tomorrow's business. Tonight Miss Zimmerman needs rest." As if on cue, Nora failed to suppress a yawn. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. "It's been a long day." Reed stood. "I should be heading back anyway. Got an early start tomorrow." He turned to Nora. "If you're interested in the school idea, I could come by in a few days once you've had time to settle in." "I'd like that," she replied, rising to her feet. "Thank you again for your help today, Mr. Walker." "Reed," he corrected with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Mr. Walker was my father." "Reed," she echoed softly, "and please call me Nora." After he left, Mrs. Wilson showed Nora back to her room, providing a nightgown and promising to help her find proper employment in the morning. Exhausted but more hopeful than she'd been hours earlier, Nora fell into a deep sleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of introductions and opportunities. True to their word, both the mercantile owner and the newspaper editor were interested in her services. By her third day in Raton, Nora had secured part-time work at both establishments, mornings at the newspaper, afternoons at the store. The arrangements were temporary, but they provided income while she considered longer-term plans. She just finished her first week of work when Reed Walker appeared at the mercantile, his tall frame filling the doorway as he removed his hat. Nora was in the back, cataloging a new shipment of goods when Mr. Thompson called for her. "Miss Zimmerman, visitor for you." Setting aside her inventory list, Nora smoothed her skirts and made her way to the front of the store. The sight of Reed standing there, looking somewhat uncomfortable among the bolts of fabric and household goods, brought an unexpected smile to her face. "Mr. Walk Reed," she corrected herself. "This is a pleasant surprise." "Nora," he nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "Heard you've been making quite an impression around town." "People have been kind," she replied, "and there's satisfaction in being useful. Mrs. Wilson says you're working 2 jobs now, for the time being." She glanced at Mr. Thompson, who was pretending not to listen. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation outside. I'm due for my midday break." Reed nodded, and once they were on the boardwalk, he seemed more at ease. "I came to see if you might be interested in riding out to look at that schoolhouse I mentioned. Some of the families are meeting there Sunday after church to discuss possibilities." Nora hesitated. "I'd like to, but I don't have a horse." "I brought the wagon," Reed said, gesturing down the street where his familiar vehicle was hitched. Thought you might want to bring some of those books, too. Show folks what could be possible." The consideration behind his planning touched her. "You've given this some thought." "Been thinking about little else," he admitted, then quickly added, "The children need education. Most of their parents can read and write the basics, but not much beyond that." "Let me speak with Mr. Thompson," Nora said. "If he can spare me this afternoon, I'd like to see this potential schoolhouse." Mr. Thompson was surprisingly accommodating, waving away her concerns about leaving early. "Business is slow on Fridays anyway," he said. "Besides, a proper school out that way would be good for everyone." An hour later, with a selection of books from her trunk carefully packed in the wagon, Nora found herself traveling north of Raton along a winding dirt road. The landscape opened up around them, rolling grasslands dotted with ponderosa pines, framed by distant mountains that seemed to shimmer in the autumn sunlight. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the vastness of it. "So different from the east." "Takes some getting used to," Reed acknowledged. "All this space can make a person feel mighty small at first. After a while, though, it starts to feel like freedom." They passed occasional homesteads, Reed pointing out who lived where and how many children they had. His knowledge of his neighbors was intimate. Who was expecting a baby, who had lost cattle to mountain lions last spring, whose crops had thrived or failed. "You care about these people," Nora observed. Reed looked surprised at her comment. "Course I do. Out here, neighbors are more than just folks who live nearby. They're the ones who help you raise a barn or bring in a harvest, the ones who ride 20 miles in a blizzard if you're sick." He glanced at her. "It's different from city living." "Yes," she agreed. "Though perhaps not as different as you might think. My father's neighborhood was tight-knit. When he died, it was neighbors who made sure I had food and firewood that first winter." A comfortable silence fell between them as the wagon rolled onward. After about an hour, Reed turned onto a narrower track that led to a small valley where a creek ran alongside a modest homestead, a cabin with a barn and corral, surrounded by cottonwoods whose leaves were just beginning to turn golden. "The McClintock place," Reed announced as they approached. "Family moved out about 8 months ago when Mrs. McClintock's lungs couldn't take the altitude anymore." The cabin was simple but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. As they pulled up, Reed jumped down and came around to help Nora descend. "No one's claimed it?" she asked, surveying the property. "Land's not the best for farming and it's too small for proper ranching, but it's perfect for a schoolhouse." He led her toward the cabin. 4 rooms inside. Main room could be the classroom. Other 3 could be living quarters for the teacher. Nora's heart quickened at the implication. "You're suggesting I would live here, alone?" Reed's expression turned concerned. "Hadn't thought how that might look. Maybe Mrs. Wilson has other ideas." "No, it's not that," Nora assured him, though propriety was certainly a consideration. "I'm just surprised at the possibility. In the East, female teachers often board with families. Space is tight in most homes around here," Reed explained as he pushed open the cabin door. "And distances being what they are, you'd need to be on site." The interior was dusty but otherwise in good condition. The main room was spacious enough for several benches and a teacher's desk. Windows allowed ample light, and the stone fireplace would provide warmth in winter. Nora walked slowly around the room, envisioning it filled with children eager to learn. "It has potential," she said, turning back to find Reed watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What? You belong here," he said simply. "Saw it the moment you started looking around." Your eyes lit up like you were seeing something the rest of us can't yet. A good teacher always sees possibilities, she replied, flustered by his observation. But there are practical considerations. Who owns this land now? What about furnishings, supplies? And would parents truly support a woman living alone out here? Reed smiled. One question at a time. Land's owned by the bank now. Manager's a friend. He'd likely work out favorable terms if it's for a school. Furnishings, we can build. Every ranch hand knows how to make a bench. Supplies. He shrugged. We'd contribute what we could. As for a woman alone, that's where community comes in. You wouldn't be without support. Nora ran her fingers along the rough-hewn mantle, considering. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd need to meet these families first, she said cautiously, see if there's truly interest. Sunday, Reed reminded her. After church, though I can tell you now there's interest. He hesitated, then added, I may have mentioned your qualifications to a few folks already. My qualifications. Nora raised an eyebrow. And what would those be, considering we've barely discussed my background? Reed had the grace to look sheepish. Mrs. Wilson might have mentioned that you graduated from some fancy women's college back east, and that your letters of recommendation were impressive enough that even Holcomb had hired you sight unseen. Ah, Nora smiled. The boarding house telegraph. Fastest communication in the territory, Reed agreed with a chuckle. They explored the rest of the cabin, a small bedroom, a kitchen area, and another room that could serve as either storage or additional living space. Despite its simplicity, Nora found herself warming to the idea of making this place her home. What about water? She asked as they stepped back outside. Reed pointed to the creek. Clean mountain runoff, and there's a well behind the cabin for drinking water. He led her around to show a stone-lined well with a hand pump. McClintock was proud of this. Not many homesteads have a proper pump. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when they finally loaded back into the wagon. On the return journey, Reed took a different route that passed by his own ranch, a more substantial property with a 2-story house, large barn, and several outbuildings. This is yours? Nora asked, impressed by the evident care that had gone into the place. Started with just the cabin over there. Reed pointed to a small structure near the main house. Added on as I could afford it, still a work in progress. It's wonderful, she said sincerely. You've built something significant here. Reed's expression softened. Would you like to see inside? Meet my foreman and his wife. They keep the place running when I'm away. The invitation felt significant somehow, but Nora nodded. I'd like that. The main house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture and touches that spoke of a desire for something beyond mere functionality, bookshelves filled with volumes, curtains at the windows, a piano in the corner of the main room. You play? Nora asked, surprised at the instrument's presence. Poorly, Reed admitted. Bought it from a family heading back east who couldn't take it with them. Always thought I'd learn properly someday. Nora sat on the piano bench and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. I could teach you. I gave lessons in Philadelphia to supplement my income while studying. A woman of many talents, Reed said, and there was something in his voice that made Nora look up to find him watching her with undisguised admiration. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Miguel and Sofia Mendez, Reed's foreman and his wife. They welcomed Nora warmly, and Sofia insisted they stay for supper. What followed was a pleasant evening of conversation and laughter, with Sofia's excellent cooking and Miguel's tales of their journey from New Mexico territory years earlier. It was fully dark by the time Reed and Nora headed back to town, lanterns swinging from the wagon to light their way. The night air had grown cool, and Reed offered her a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. Thank you for today, Nora said as the lights of Raton appeared in the distance. For showing me the cabin, your home, for considering me for the school. Thank you for considering it, Reed replied. Most Eastern women would run screaming from the isolation alone. "I'm not most Eastern women," Nora said with a quiet confidence. "And isolation is relative. I felt more welcomed here in a week than in some Philadelphia drawing rooms I've known all my life." Reed was silent for a moment. "Would you tell me about him? Who? The man who broke your heart back east. Must have been someone to make you travel all this way alone." Nora laughed, genuinely surprised. "There was no man, broken heart or otherwise. I came west because I wanted to make a difference. Because I believe education is a right that belongs to everyone, not just those fortunate enough to live in cities." "No suitors at all," Reed pressed, sounding skeptical. "Pretty, educated woman like you." "There were suitors," she admitted. "None that saw me as more than an ornament or a convenient merger of family interests." She looked at him directly. "I want more than that. And what would more look like to you, Nora Zimmerman?" His question was soft but intent. She considered her answer carefully. "Partnership, respect, the freedom to use my mind and abilities fully. And yes, love, but the kind that grows from those things, not the fleeting kind based on appearances or convenience." Reed nodded slowly. "Sounds like you've given it considerable thought." "I have," she agreed. "What about you?" "No wife waiting at that fine house." "No," he said simply. "Never found a woman willing to take on the challenges of ranch life. Or perhaps I never found one I was willing to ask." The implication hung in the air between them as they reached the edge of town. By the time Reed pulled up in front of Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, Nora found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "I'll come by on Sunday morning," Reed said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Service starts at 9. We can head out to the McClintock place right after." "I'll be ready," she promised, "and I'll bring more books to show the families." Reed held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Sleep well, Nora. You too, Reed." As she watched him drive away, Nora felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with potential employment and everything to do with the man himself. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. She'd known him barely a week. Yet there was something about Reed Walker that felt familiar, as if she'd been waiting to meet him all her life. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a sense of purpose that had Nora awake before dawn. She carefully selected her attire, a forest green skirt and crisp white blouse that struck the right balance between respectable and practical. Her books were already packed, a selection that would demonstrate the range of subjects she could teach. Church in Raton was a community affair, with families traveling from miles around to attend the simple service in the town's only church. Nora sat with Mrs. Wilson, conscious of the curious glances sent her way. As the newest arrival in a small town, she was still a novelty. Reed arrived just before the service began, slipping into a pew near the back. He caught her eye briefly and nodded, a gesture that shouldn't have sent such warmth through her but did nonetheless. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Reed made his way to her side. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied, then hesitated. "Reed, what if they don't want me as their teacher?" His expression softened. "Then we'll find another way, but they will." The confidence in his voice steadied her. They collected her books from the boarding house and set out for the McClintock place. The wagon now containing not only Nora and Reed, but also 3 other families who were interested in the school proposal. By the time they arrived, several more wagons were already there. Children played near the creek while adults gathered on the cabin's porch. Reed helped Nora down, then introduced her to the assembled families. "This is Miss Nora Zimmerman," he announced. "She holds a teaching degree from a college in Pennsylvania and came west specifically to bring education to communities like ours." Nora stepped forward, grateful for Reed's introduction, but determined to speak for herself. "Thank you for considering this proposal," she said clearly. "I believe every child deserves the opportunity to learn, regardless of where they live. I'm prepared to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and natural sciences." A man stepped forward tall, with a weathered face and practical clothing that marked him as a rancher. "I'm Thomas Davis. Got 3 children who need schooling. Oldest is 12, been teaching him what I can, but it's not enough." He gestured to the books in Reed's arms. "Those what you'd be teaching from, some of them," Nora acknowledged. "I'd need more, appropriate to different ages and abilities. And slates, paper, pencils. Costs money," another man pointed out. "We're not wealthy folks out here." "I understand," Nora said, "but consider it an investment. Children who can read and calculate will run better farms and ranches. They'll negotiate better prices for cattle and crops. They'll understand contracts and not be cheated." This practical argument seemed to resonate more than appeals to education's intrinsic value. Heads nodded around the group. "What about payment?" a woman asked. She stood beside Thomas Davis, presumably his wife. "Teachers need to eat same as anyone." "I propose a combination of money and goods," Nora said, having given this considerable thought. "Each family contributes what they can, perhaps $5 per child per month in cash, with additional payment in food, firewood, or labor for maintaining the school." Discussion broke out among the families, some conferring in hushed tones while others openly debated the merits of the proposal. Reed remained at Nora's side, his presence reassuring as she answered questions about her qualifications and teaching methods. Finally, Thomas Davis spoke again. "Seems to me we'd be fools to pass this up. My wife and I are in. $5 a month for each child, plus meat when we butcher and help with repairs when needed." One by one, the other families agreed. By the end of the meeting, Nora had commitments for 14 children ranging from 6 to 15 years old. They set a start date for 3 weeks hence, allowing time to prepare the cabin and gather necessary supplies. As the families departed, promising to return the following weekend to help clean and repair the schoolhouse, Nora felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was why she had come west, to bring education where it was needed and valued. "Told you they'd want you," Reed said quietly as the last wagon pulled away. They stood together on the porch, watching dust settle in the yard. "You did," Nora acknowledged, turning to him with a smile that came from deep within. "Thank you for believing in this, in me." Reed's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to show you before we head back. Will you trust me for another hour or so?" Curious, Nora nodded. "Of course." They climbed back into the wagon, but instead of turning toward town, Reed guided the horses along a trail that led up into the foothills. The path climbed steadily, winding through stands of ponderosa pine, until they reached a clearing that overlooked the valley. Reed secured the horses, then helped Nora from the wagon. "This way," he said, offering his arm as they walked to the edge of the clearing. The view took Nora's breath away. Below them stretched the vast landscape of northern New Mexico Territory grasslands, forests, distant mesas, and the scattered homesteads and ranches that made up their community. In the clear autumn air, she could see for miles in every direction. "It's magnificent," she whispered. Reed nodded. "First time I saw this view, I knew I'd found home." He turned to face her directly. "Nora, I know we've only known each other a short time. Maybe this is too forward, but I'm not a man who believes in wasting time when something important comes along." Her heart began to race as she realized where this conversation might be heading. "Reed, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises, not yet. But I want you to know that I admire your courage in coming out here alone. your dedication to teaching, your willingness to take on challenges that would send most people running back east on the first train. That's kind of you to say, Nora replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. It's not kindness, it's truth. Reed took a deep breath. I'd like your permission to call on you properly, to get to know you better outside of school meetings and wagon rides. The directness of his request was refreshing after the veiled intentions and social games she'd experienced in Philadelphia. I'd like that, she answered honestly. Very much. Relief and pleasure transformed his face. Good, that's good. He hesitated, then asked, would it be too forward to seal that agreement with a kiss? Instead of answering, Nora gathered her courage and stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. Reed's hands came to rest lightly at her waist as he bent down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. It lasted only moments, but when they parted, Nora felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. We should head back, Reed said softly, though he made no move to release her. Yes, Nora agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. Mrs. Wilson will worry. The return journey passed in comfortable conversation, both of them more relaxed now that intentions had been declared. When they reached the boarding house, Reed walked Nora to the door. I'll be by tomorrow after work, he said. Thought we might make a list of supplies needed for the school. I'd appreciate that, Nora replied. Good night, Reed. Good night, Nora. As promised, Reed appeared the following evening, and they spent several hours at Mrs. Wilson's dining table making detailed lists of what would be needed to transform the McClintock cabin into a proper school. The older woman provided coffee and pie, occasionally offering suggestions based on her own brief teaching experience years earlier. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. True to their word, the families came together to ready the cabin. Men repaired the roof and floors, while women scrubbed every surface. Children helped clear the yard and gathered wildflowers to brighten the rooms. Reed contributed lumber for benches and desks, which he and other men constructed on site. Nora divided her time between her work in town and preparations for the school. She ordered books and supplies through Mr. Thompson's store, often at cost, as the merchant supported the educational endeavor. She said goodbye to her position at the newspaper, though the editor invited her to contribute occasional articles about the school's progress. Through it all, Reed was a constant presence, stopping by the boarding house most evenings to discuss the day's developments or simply to enjoy Nora's company. Their courtship progressed with a straightforward honesty that suited them both: walks through town, shared meals at Mrs. Wilson's table, and increasingly, conversations about hopes and dreams that extended far beyond the school's opening. 2 days before classes were to begin, Reed drove Nora out to the cabin with the last of her personal belongings. Mrs. Wilson had contributed linens and kitchen essentials, while Sophia Mendez had stocked the pantry with basics. The transformation from abandoned homestead to schoolhouse and teachers' quarters was remarkable. What do you think? Reed asked as Nora walked through the rooms, now clean and furnished with simple but functional items. Will it do? It's perfect, she said, turning in a slow circle in what would be her classroom. Benches and desks were arranged in neat rows facing a larger desk at the front. Bookshelves lined one wall, already partially filled with the volumes she'd brought and others donated by families. A large slate board hung beside the fireplace. I have something for you, Reed said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small brass bell. Every proper school needs one. Nora took the bell, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Where did you find it? Ordered it special from Denver, he admitted. Wanted you to have something to make it official. She rang the bell experimentally, its clear tone filling the room. "It's wonderful, thank you." Reed took a step closer. "There's something else I want to ask you." "Yes." Nora's pulse quickened at his serious tone. "I know you'll be busy with the school starting, and I don't want to distract from that, but I was hoping." He paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Would you consider having supper at my ranch this Saturday? Just us. I'd come get you, of course, and bring you back before it's too late." The invitation represented a step forward in their relationship, more private, more intentional than their previous encounters. "I'd be delighted," Nora replied, touched by his consideration of her schedule and reputation. Reed's smile was worth any potential gossip the outing might generate. "I'll pick you up at 4 then. Sophia's promised to make her special chicken dish." The next 2 days were consumed with final preparations for the school's opening. Nora barely had time to think about her upcoming dinner with Reed, though the anticipation of it hummed in the background of her busy days. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for beginnings. Nora dressed carefully in a navy blue skirt and white blouse, her hair neatly arranged in a practical style that would stay tidy throughout the day. She'd been at the cabin since Sunday afternoon, wanting to be fully prepared for her students' arrival. At 8 o'clock, she stepped onto the porch and rang her bell, its bright tone carrying across the yard where families were already gathering. Children lined up with varying degrees of enthusiasm, some excited, others apprehensive, a few clearly there under duress. "Good morning," Nora called, surveying what was now her school. "Welcome to your first day of classes. Please come in and find seats. Younger children in front, older ones toward the back." As the children filed in, parents watched from the yard, some openly curious about what would happen inside the schoolhouse. Nora had invited them to observe this first day, understanding their natural concern about entrusting their children's education to a newcomer. The morning passed quickly as Nora assessed each child's current knowledge and abilities. She organized them into groups based on their skills rather than strictly by age, recognizing that some of the older children had received little previous instruction, while some younger ones had been taught at home. By midday, parents began to drift away, satisfied that their children were in capable hands. Nora led her students outside for lunch and supervised games afterward, noting which children worked well together and which might need extra attention. The afternoon session focused on establishing routines and expectations. By the time Nora rang the bell to end the day at 3 o'clock, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment mingled with exhaustion. As the last wagon pulled away, she sat on the porch steps, mentally reviewing the day and planning adjustments for tomorrow. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the approaching rider until he was nearly at the cabin. "How was the first day?" Reed asked, dismounting from his horse. Nora looked up, surprised and pleased by his appearance. "Challenging, rewarding, exhausting," she admitted with a laugh. "I didn't expect to see you today. Thought you might need this," he said, handing her a small basket. Inside, she found fresh bread, cheese, and a jar of preserved peaches. "Figured you might be too tired to cook." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you. I was just sitting here wondering if I had the energy to make supper." Reed sat beside her on the steps, a respectable distance between them. "Tell me about your day." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Nora described her students, their varying abilities, and her plans for teaching them. Reed listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest and offering suggestions based on his knowledge of the families. "You're going to make a difference here," he said when she finally paused. "These children are lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Nora replied honestly. To have found a place where education is valued, where parents are willing to make sacrifices for their children's future. Reed studied her face in the fading light. "Are you happy here, truly?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "More than I expected to be." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "I should go, let you rest." He stood and collected his horse's reins. "Still on for Saturday?" "Absolutely," Nora confirmed, rising as well. "I'm looking forward to it." Reed mounted his horse but lingered a moment longer. "Sleep well, teacher," he said with a gentle smile before turning toward home. Nora watched until he disappeared from view, then went inside to enjoy the simple meal he'd brought. As she prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking not just of the day's lessons, but of the man whose support had made it all possible. The rest of the week established a rhythm, teaching during the day, planning lessons in the evening, with occasional visitors stopping by to check on the school's progress. By Friday, Nora felt she had a solid understanding of each student's needs and had begun to develop individual learning plans alongside group lessons. Saturday arrived with a sense of anticipation that had little to do with school and everything to do with her evening plans. Nora taught a half-day session for older students who needed extra help with mathematics, then spent time tidying the cabin and preparing for her dinner with Reed. She chose her finest dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy with subtle black trim that she'd rarely had occasion to wear since arriving in New Mexico. Her hair she arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual teaching coiffure, with soft curls framing her face. At precisely 4 o'clock, she heard the sound of Reed's wagon approaching. Taking a deep breath to calm her inexplicably fluttering nerves, Nora stepped onto the porch just as he pulled up. Reed's expression as he saw her made any effort worthwhile. He stared for a moment before remembering to remove his hat. "Nora," he said simply, the admiration in his voice conveying what words could not. "Is it too formal?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I can change." "No," Reed interrupted quickly. "You look beautiful, I just—" He smiled ruefully. "I cleaned up as best I could, but I'm afraid I can't match your elegance." In truth, Reed had clearly made an effort. His hair was neatly trimmed. He wore a clean shirt with a string tie, and his usual work boots had been replaced with polished dress boots. "You look very handsome," Nora assured him as he helped her into the wagon. The ride to Reed's ranch was filled with comfortable conversation about the week's events, progress at the school, developments in town, and stories about various students that had Nora alternating between laughter and fond exasperation. When they arrived at the ranch, Nora was surprised to find the house transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch posts, casting a warm glow over the entrance. Inside, the table was set with what appeared to be Reed's best dishes and silverware, a bouquet of late wildflowers serving as a centerpiece. Sophia helped with the preparations, but she and Miguel are having supper at the bunkhouse tonight, Reed explained as he took Nora's shawl. "I wanted us to have privacy." The significance of the arrangement wasn't lost on Nora. This was no casual supper between friends. Reed had created an intimate setting that spoke of serious intentions. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely touched by the effort he'd made. "Though I hope you're a better cook than I am, or we might go hungry." Reed laughed. "Sophia prepared everything before she left. I just need to serve it without dropping anything." He gestured toward the table. "Please sit. Would you like wine? It's from California, ordered it special last month." The meal that followed was the most pleasant Nora could remember enjoying in years. The food was excellent, but it was Reed's company that made the evening special. Away from the distractions of town or school business, they spoke of personal matters, childhood memories, books they'd read, dreams they'd pursued or abandoned. I almost went to medical school, Nora admitted as they lingered over dessert. My father encouraged it. He believed women should have the same opportunities as men. Why didn't you? Reed asked, genuinely curious. My father died during my second year of college. The money went to paying his debts and medical school. She shrugged. It became impossible. Teaching was a more practical path. Reed nodded thoughtfully. Do you regret it, not becoming a doctor sometimes, Nora said honestly, but teaching has its own rewards, and who knows? Perhaps someday one of my students will become the doctor I couldn't be. After dinner, Reed invited her into the sitting room, where a fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. The room felt different in the evening light, more intimate, more like a home than it had during her previous visit. I've been thinking, Reed said as they sat beside each other on the sofa, close but not touching. About the school, about you living out there alone. I'm managing fine, Nora assured him, though in truth, the isolation had been an adjustment. After the constant noise and activity of Philadelphia, the profound silence of nights at the cabin sometimes left her feeling untethered. I don't doubt it, Reed replied. But winter's coming. Storms can make travel impossible for days, even weeks, if you needed help. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, Nora acknowledged. I've been learning to be self-sufficient. Reed turned to face her more directly. Nora, I'm not questioning your capabilities, but they're self-sufficient, and then there's stubborn pride that puts you at risk. The bluntness of his statement surprised her. I don't think concern for my independence constitutes stubborn pride, she said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. No, but refusing help when it's offered might, Reed countered gently. I'm not suggesting you abandon the cabin or your independence, just that you consider alternatives for the worst of winter. Nora softened at his evident concern. What alternatives did you have in mind? Reed hesitated, then spoke carefully. The Davis family has offered to host you during the deepest winter months. Their place is closer to most of the students anyway. Or, he took a deep breath. Or there's another option. Something in his tone made Nora's heart beat faster, which is, you could marry me. The words hung in the air between them, breathtaking in their simplicity and directness. Nora stared at him, momentarily speechless. Reed continued into the silence. I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a few months. But I think we both feel that this is different, that what's between us is real and worth building on. Reed, Nora finally managed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer now, he assured her quickly. I'm not pressing for an immediate decision, just think about it, about us. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I believe we could build a good life together, Nora, a partnership like you said you wanted. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't a proposal born of convenience or practicality, despite the practical considerations he'd mentioned. This was a man offering his heart along with his name and home. I care for you, Nora said carefully. Very much, but marriage is a serious commitment. I know, Reed nodded. And I wouldn't ask if I wasn't serious about it, about you. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Just promise you'll consider it. I will, she promised, her mind whirling with the possibilities his offer presented. Marriage to Reed would mean staying in New Mexico permanently, building a life far different from the one she'd once envisioned in Philadelphia. Yet the thought filled her with excitement rather than trepidation. The rest of the evening passed in conversation that carefully avoided Reed's proposal while simultaneously acknowledging that something had changed between them. When it came time for Nora to return to her cabin, Reed helped her into her shawl, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. Thank you for tonight, she said, turning to face him. For everything. In answer, Reed drew her gently into his arms and kissed her a deeper, more passionate kiss than their first had been, yet still restrained by respect and the propriety they both valued. When they parted, Nora felt breathless and more certain than ever that what they shared was worth pursuing. "I'll drive you home," Reed said softly. The ride back to the cabin was quieter than their journey out had been, both of them lost in thought about the evening's revelation. When they arrived, Reed insisted on walking her to the door, checking that the lamps were filled and the stove had enough wood for the night. "I'll be fine," Nora assured him with a smile. "I've become quite capable these last few weeks." "I know you have," Reed acknowledged. "But it doesn't mean I'll stop worrying about you." He stepped back toward the door. "Good night, Nora. Sleep well." "Good night, Reed." After he left, Nora moved through her evening routine in a daze, her mind replaying Reed's proposal from every angle. By the time she climbed into bed, she was no closer to a decision, though her heart seemed increasingly clear about its preferences. The following weeks brought changes to the landscape and the community. October gave way to November, and the first light snows dusted the mountains surrounding Raton. The school continued to flourish, with word spreading to more distant homesteads. Nora gained 3 new students, bringing her total to 17. Reed called on her regularly, usually bringing small gifts, a jar of honey, a new book, once even a kitten from a litter born in his barn. "For company," he'd explained as the tiny calico explored her new home. "And to keep mice away from your books." They never directly discussed his proposal again, though it hovered between them, acknowledged in glances and the increasingly tender moments they shared when alone. Nora found herself measuring the days by Reed's visits, her happiness directly tied to his presence. As November progressed, the weather turned more severe. The first major snowstorm hit just before Thanksgiving, leaving several feet of snow across the region. School was canceled for 3 days while families dug out and trails were cleared. Red appeared at Nora's cabin the morning after the storm, having broken trail through deep drifts to check on her. "I'm fine," she assured him from the doorway, though in truth the howling winds had kept her awake much of the night. "The stove kept it warm enough." "Warm enough isn't good enough," Reed said firmly, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. He carried supplies, more firewood, food, lantern oil. "This is just the beginning, Nora. Winter's barely started." "I know," she acknowledged, accepting the provisions gratefully. "But the cabin is sturdier than it looks, and I'm more resourceful than you might think." Reed's expression softened as he removed his hat and coat. "I don't doubt your resourcefulness for a second, but even the most capable person needs help sometimes." As he built up the fire and helped restock her pantry, Nora watched him with growing certainty. The past weeks had only confirmed what she'd begun to suspect the night of his proposal, that Reed Walker was the partner she'd been hoping to find, perhaps without even realizing it. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said as they sat at her small table, sharing coffee and the bread he'd brought. "About marriage." Reed's hand stilled around his cup. "And I would like more time," Nora said carefully. "Not because I'm uncertain about you, but because I want to be sure I can be the wife you deserve, that I can adapt to ranch life alongside teaching." Relief and understanding mingled in Reed's expression. "That's fair," he said. "I'm not going anywhere, Nora. Take the time you need." "But," she continued, reaching across the table to take his hand, "I do love you. I want you to know that with certainty." The simple declaration transformed Reed's face. He rose and came around the table, pulling Nora to her feet and into his arms. "I love you too," he said before kissing her with an intensity that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally parted, Reed pressed his forehead to hers. "Knowing that is enough for now. The rest will come in its own time." School resumed the following week, though attendance was sporadic as winter weather made travel difficult. Nora adjusted her teaching methods, giving older students work to take home to younger siblings who couldn't always make the journey. Reed continued to visit several times a week, sometimes staying to help with school maintenance or to listen as Nora read aloud to practice lessons. As Christmas approached, excitement grew among the students. Many had never experienced a proper school Christmas celebration, and Nora was determined to make it special. She organized a program of recitations and songs, with small gifts for each child, hand-bound booklets of stories she'd written herself, illustrated by the more artistic students. The celebration was held the Friday before Christmas, with families gathering at the cabin for the students' performances. Pride shone in parents' eyes as children demonstrated their newfound knowledge. Afterward, there was a shared meal and an exchange of simple gifts, handmade items, and practical offerings that reflected the community's values. Reed had been quieter than usual during the festivities, watching Nora with an intensity that made her both curious and slightly nervous. As families began to depart, he approached her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, pressing it into her hands. "Open it later when you're alone." Nora raised an eyebrow. "That sounds mysterious," Reed smiled. "Just personal." "I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right." "Of course," she replied, tucking the package into her pocket. "I have something for you as well." It was late before Nora had the cabin to herself again. After tidying the remains of the celebration and preparing for bed, she finally sat beside the stove and carefully unwrapped Reed's gift. Inside the paper was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Her breath caught as she opened the lid. Nestled on a bed of soft cloth was a ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond. Beneath it was a folded note in Reed's distinctive handwriting. "Nora, this was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they decided to leave everything behind and head west. It represented a new beginning, a leap of faith, and a love strong enough to face unknown challenges. I offer it to you in the same spirit. Whenever you're ready, be it tomorrow or months from now, I'll be waiting." With all my love, Reed. Tears blurred Nora's vision as she lifted the ring from its box, turning it to catch the lamplight. It was perfect, not ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity and meaning. She slipped it onto her finger experimentally, finding that it fit as if made for her. She left it there as she prepared for bed, the weight of it unfamiliar but right somehow. As she drifted toward sleep, Nora found herself planning not lessons or school activities, but a future that included Reed, his ranch, and the community they were building together. Morning brought fresh snow and a clarity of purpose that had been building for weeks. By the time Reed's wagon appeared in the distance, Nora had made her decision. She waited on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold, the ring prominently displayed on her left hand. Reed saw it immediately as he approached, his steps faltering briefly before he covered the remaining distance between them in long strides. "Nora," she held out her hand, the ring catching the winter sunlight. "Yes," she said simply. "My answer is yes, Reed Walker. I would be honored to be your wife." Joy transformed his face as he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "Are you certain? I meant what I said about taking all the time you need." "I've had time enough," Nora replied firmly. "These past months have shown me everything I need to know about the man you are and the life we could build together. I love you, and I don't want to waste another day pretending we're just friends." Reed's kiss was answer enough, a promise of all that lay ahead for them. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, he kept her close in the circle of his arms. When, he asked, spring would give us time to prepare. Sooner, Nora decided. New Year's Day. A proper beginning for our new life. Reed raised an eyebrow. That's barely a week away. Are you sure? Completely. Nora smiled up at him. We don't need a grand celebration, just us, our friends, and the promise we make to each other. Preparations for the wedding became a community affair. Once word spread of the engagement, which took approximately 3 hours, by Nora's estimation, offers of help poured in. Mrs. Wilson insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house. Sophia Mendez offered to prepare traditional wedding dishes from her homeland. The Davis family promised music, as their oldest son played fiddle. Nora found herself swept along in the excitement, touched by the genuine happiness her neighbors expressed. Several of her female students asked shyly if they might help decorate the church, while their mothers offered advice and assistance with her wedding attire. I didn't bring anything suitable for a bride, Nora admitted to Mrs. Wilson during a planning session. Margaret Davis's daughter left her wedding dress when she moved to California, the older woman suggested. She's about your size, and I'm sure they'd be pleased to have it worn again. The dress proved to be perfect, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery, requiring only minor alterations to fit Nora's slender frame. For something borrowed, Mrs. Wilson offered a lace handkerchief that had been in her family for generations. Sophia contributed a blue ribbon to weave through Nora's hair, and Reed's gift of the ring provided something old. Reed, meanwhile, found himself equally busy with preparations. He had repairs made to the main house, creating a proper study where Nora could continue planning lessons even after they were married. Miguel and the ranch hands built bookshelves and a desk, while Red himself worked late into the evenings on a special wedding gift he refused to let Nora see in advance. The day before the wedding, a final decision had to be made about the school. After consulting with the families, it was agreed that Nora would continue teaching through winter, with Reed driving her to and from the cabin each day once they were married. When spring came, they would reassess based on student needs and travel conditions. New Year's Day dawned bright and clear, the world outside transformed by a fresh snowfall that sparkled in the morning sun. Nora woke early in her room at Mrs. Wilson's, where she'd spent the night as was traditional before a wedding. The older woman brought breakfast and helped her dress, arranging Nora's hair in an elegant style adorned with the blue ribbon and small white flowers preserved from the fall. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Wilson said, stepping back to admire the result. "Reed won't know what hit him." "I hope he'll be pleased," Nora replied, smoothing the dress nervously. Despite her certainty about the marriage, the significance of the day brought natural butterflies. "Child, that man has looked at you like you hung the moon since the day he found you waiting by that stage station," Mrs. Wilson said with a knowing smile. "Today just makes official what everyone else has seen for months." The church filled quickly as townsfolk and ranching families gathered for the first wedding of the new year. Reed waited at the altar, uncharacteristically formal in a new suit, his expression a mixture of nervousness and anticipation as the small congregation settled into place. When the Davis boy began playing a wedding march on his fiddle, all heads turned toward the back of the church. Nora appeared in the doorway, radiant in white, her arm linked with Mr. Hollister's. The elderly gentleman had offered to give her away in her father's absence, a gesture that had brought tears to Nora's eyes when he proposed it. Reed's face as he watched her approach was everything Nora had hoped for: wonder, joy, and love so evident that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When Mr. Hollister placed her hand in Reed's, the connection between them felt like coming home after a long journey. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with vows that spoke of partnership and dedication rather than submission. Reed's voice was steady as he promised to cherish and respect Nora all the days of his life. Her own response was clear and confident, a public declaration of the love that had grown so naturally between them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reed's kiss was gentle but unmistakably passionate, drawing good-natured cheers from their friends and neighbors. As they turned to face the congregation, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Walker, Nora felt a profound sense of rightness in the path she had chosen. The celebration at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house stretched well into the evening. There was dancing in the cleared dining room, abundant food and drink, and countless well wishes from a community that had embraced both Nora and the union she had formed with one of their own. As the party continued, Reed drew Nora aside to a quiet corner. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package from his coat pocket. "A wedding gift." Nora unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate wooden carving of the schoolhouse, complete with tiny figures representing students in the yard. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of many hours. "Reed," she breathed, tracing the details with gentle fingers. "Did you make this?" He nodded, looking pleased at her reaction. "Wanted you to know that I understand how important teaching is to you. That being my wife doesn't mean giving up your calling." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for this, but for truly seeing me from the very beginning." Later, as they prepared to depart for Reed's ranch, now their home together, Nora found herself surrounded by the women of the community, receiving last-minute advice, both practical and personal, about married life. Some made her blush, while others had her laughing at their frankness. "Don't listen to all that nonsense," Mrs. Wilson whispered as she helped Nora into her coat. "Just remember that love and honesty will see you through most troubles." The journey to the ranch was magical, the wagon following a path illuminated by moonlight on snow. Reed had wrapped Nora in blankets against the cold, keeping her close beside him as they traveled. "Happy?" he asked as their home came into view, windows glowing with welcome light that Sophia had prepared before discreetly departing for the bunkhouse. "More than I knew was possible," Nora replied honestly, leaning against his shoulder. "When I arrived in Raton 4 months ago, standing alone beside that trunk, I never imagined this would be my future." Reed's arm tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made, offering you a ride in my wagon that day." "For both of us," Nora agreed as they pulled up to their house now. Reed lifted her down from the wagon and, to her surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walker," he said softly as he set her down in the entry hall. "I like the sound of that," Nora replied, removing her coat and looking around at what was now her home. Reed had made subtle changes since her last visit, feminine touches added to the decor, fresh curtains at the windows, her books already arranged on shelves in the study he'd prepared. That night, as they discovered each other as husband and wife, Nora found in Reed the true partner she had always hoped for, tender, considerate, and passionate in equal measure. Their coming together felt like the natural culmination of the journey that had begun that dusty evening by the stage-coach station. The weeks and months that followed established patterns that would serve them throughout their lives together. Nora continued teaching, with Reed faithfully transporting her to and from the school each day. In the evenings, they shared the details of their separate work, finding in each other sounding boards and sources of support. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. With improved weather, more children were able to attend school regularly. The community began discussing the possibility of building a proper schoolhouse closer to town, with Nora as its head teacher. Reed expanded his cattle operation, secure in the knowledge that he had a true partner with whom to share both successes and setbacks. By their first anniversary, Nora had news of her own to share. On a crisp January evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, she took Reed's hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "We'll be 3 by summer's end," she said softly, watching his expression change from confusion to wonder as her meaning became clear. "A baby," he whispered, eyes wide with amazement. "We're having a baby," Nora nodded, laughing as Reed whooped with joy and lifted her from her chair to spin her around the room. "Careful," she protested, though she was just as elated. "The little one might get dizzy." Reed set her down gently, then knelt before her chair to press a reverent kiss to her midsection. "Hello in there," he said softly. "Your papa can't wait to meet you." As Reed continued his one-sided conversation with their unborn child, Nora ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had transformed her life in so many ways. The path ahead would hold challenges. She knew balancing motherhood with teaching, adapting to the changing needs of their family and community, but with Reed beside her, she faced the future with confidence and joy. Their son, Thomas Reed Walker, was born in late August, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Nora took the fall term away from teaching, focusing on her new role as a mother while maintaining contact with the school through weekly visits. By Thomas's first birthday, the new schoolhouse in town was complete, and Nora returned to teaching part-time, bringing her son with her 3 days a week. The other days she devoted to her growing family and the ranch, which had prospered under Reed's careful management. Their daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family 2 years later, followed by another son, James, when Thomas was 5. Through it all, Reed and Nora maintained the partnership they had established from the beginning, supporting each other's work, sharing responsibilities, and facing life's challenges together. As the years passed, the memory of that first meeting remained special to them both. Sometimes, when they traveled to town together, Reed would point out the spot where the stage station had once stood before being replaced by a more modern building. "Best day of my life," he would say, squeezing Nora's hand. "When I saw you standing there beside that trunk, looking so lost and so determined all at once." "I wasn't lost," Nora would remind him with a smile. "I was exactly where I needed to be, waiting for you to come along and say those magic words." "Come rest your feet in my wagon," Reed would reply, the familiar phrase still holding all the promise it had on that dusty evening so many years before. "Never knew 7 words would change my life forever." On their 20th anniversary, with their children growing into adults with dreams of their own, Reed surprised Nora with a special gift, a painting commissioned from a traveling artist, depicting that first meeting. In it, a young woman in a navy dress stood beside a trunk, looking toward an approaching wagon driven by a broad-shouldered man in a worn hat. "So we never forget how it all began," Reed said as Nora unwrapped the canvas, tears in her eyes at the thoughtful reminder of their beginning. "As if I could ever forget," she replied, leaning into the embrace of the man who had become her heart's home. "Every happiness I've known these 20 years began the moment you stopped that wagon and offered me a ride. Best decision I ever made," Reed murmured against her hair. "Thank you for saying yes that day, and every day since." "Thank you for asking," Nora replied simply, turning in his arms to kiss the man who had transformed a moment of uncertainty into a lifetime of love.